Good day, everyone. I would like to welcome you all for joining us live and those who will be joining in afterwards. I want to sincerely thank our guests and special speakers for being part of the webinar today. My name is Ikwai Womoyo, and I'm the FIP YPG chairperson of projects. And I'm also a hospital pharmacist working with Stanley Medical and Kidney Center. And with me in this webinar and who will be acting as moderator is Mr. Ravi Sharma.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ravi Sharma. I'm the Director for England at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain and the FIP YPG Professional Development Team member, and here moderating to this afternoon's webinar. Just some brief announcements today. This webinar will be recorded and available for people who are unable to see it live. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please do use the chat function to be able to ask them. You will have an opportunity to field these questions to the speakers and panelists a bit later. Also, we're really keen at the end of this, we'll be sending out a short survey for you to complete to obtain some of your feedback on how we can improve these webinar series going forward. So to just give a bit of information about FIP, so FIP's vision is a world where everyone's benefits from access to safe, effective, quality and affordable medicines and health technologies. Our mission is to support global health by enabling the advancements of pharmaceutical practice, science and education. We're pleased to be delivering this first webinar of the FIP YPG for 2021 on the topic of continuous professional development cycle, a suitable career development model for young pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists. As part of the FIP, we have an FIP Young Pharmacist group, which you can all be part of, particularly pharmacists, pharmaceutical scientists and students from across the globe. And there's some of the prerequisites to be in there. And as part of that, membership fee will be based upon the country's income of where you come from, but it's a growing group of networked people from across the globe to share experiences, knowledge and expertise, but also forming a real fundamental part of FIP's delivery of their mission and vision strategy, as just mentioned previously. Next slide, please. And these are our fantastic experts from across the globe who are speaking today and will be fielding your questions later. I'm very excited to hear about everything that they have to say and their pearls of wisdom that they'll be sharing with all of us here. Next slide, please. Today, basically, this slide covers the program that will be covered for today, but by the end of this webinar, you should be able to have gained insights about the steps in the career development cycle, understand how to effectively utilize the continuing professional development cycle through reflection, planning, action, and evaluation, learn about effective reflection and subsequent planning as a tool for continual professional development, and gain knowledge on how to properly carry out evaluation process after taking appropriate action as it relates to your own professional career development. And as I mentioned, there'll be opportunities for everyone to ask questions at the end, and we'll be shortly wrapping up after that. Many of you would have seen this diagram. Is the FIP's development goals, and it covers a number of different areas which we hope, if reached its full potential, will enable pharmacists, pharmaceutical scientists and students to flourish for now and the future. And as part of this, a part of us delivering the FIP development goals, the FIP YPG developed this career development toolkit for early careers pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists that aligned to the FIP development goals of 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Next slide, please. So by no means less, I would like to now introduce our first speaker today, Anisha, and thank you very much for joining us today, Anisha. I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Good evening, everyone from Malaysia. My name is Anisha. I'm a lecturer at Monash University, Malaysia. Before this, I used to be a clinical pharmacist and a community pharmacist in New Zealand. And now I also serve for the FIP YPG as a liaison for the Workforce Development Hub. Next slide, please. Today, I will talk to you about the relevance of the continuing professional development cycle, focusing specifically on reflection or reflective practice. Great. So today we're going to talk about the concept of reflective practice and its importance, discussing how to reflect effectively, exploring SWOT analysis as a tool for effective reflection. What is reflection? Why is it important for pharmacists or healthcare professionals? Let's look at this further. So reflection is the process of describing, analyzing, and evaluating an experience or an event to make sense of it and create a deeper understanding of what took place in order to learn, improve, and develop your skills and practice further in your career. It helps you to identify what went well during the experience and what could be done better in the future. The ultimate goal of reflection is to frame the situation positively as an experience that you can learn from. Next slide, please. Reflection can be done individually with your peers or in your workplace teams, so you can learn more through objective opinions or experiences of senior colleagues or mentors. There are so many opportunities to prompt reflection. In fact, what we don't realize is that we are subconsciously reflecting constantly on multiple aspects of our daily life by thinking about and learning from our experiences to understand what we should repeat and what we should avoid. For example, the coffee in that cafe was terrible, I'm not going to go back there, or this conversation with my colleague was pleasant, I can look into exploring this further. Applying this to work practice can be incredibly beneficial. Next slide, please. So there are some benefits of reflection, and I've listed them all here. Essentially, reflection helps you to identify your strengths and weaknesses to enable enhancement and development of your skills, which helps to ease career planning considerably as you create an awareness of your strengths and weaknesses. Next slide, please. So how do we reflect effectively? Let's go on to the next slide. So while there are many different models of reflection, they mainly follow the same core commonalities of describing an experience in detail, analyzing the situation to create awareness of thoughts and feelings while identifying strengths and weaknesses, evaluating the experience to identify knowledge and challenge assumptions, and drawing conclusions to create an action plan that will transform behavior and/or practice. Next slide. Self-reflection helps you to identify your passion and motivation, the direction you would like your career to take, the skills you need to develop while helping you to set clear targets to monitor your professional development. A popular model that we use and that we also teach in my university is the what, so what, now what model, where you think and understand about what took place, make sense of the situation, and identify the next steps. Ekwebam will get you to show that model. So here you can have a look at it. It's about what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what you intend to do about it. Okay, so next slide. So peer reflection can be carried out informally as a chat with colleagues or formally through a performance development review at work. And it gives us the opportunity to appraise ourselves more effectively by viewing our practice through the lens of another. It can provide validation that we are on the right track and give us that push that we need to enable change. However, it's important to establish a shared understanding on the topic of reflection, the goals identified, and the self-improvement strategies to be actioned. Next slide, please. So now let's look at how SWOT analysis can be used as a tool for effective reflection. So what is SWOT analysis? A SWOT analysis is a tool that provides prompts to help you understand how you perceive yourself, your skills, your gaps, and how it may impact your career. A SWOT analysis consists of 4 parts. You have S for strengths, where you want to focus on what you're doing well. You have W for weaknesses, where you consider the areas where you need to improve. You have O for opportunities, so you take into consideration your goals. And T for threats, where you realistically assess what threats you face in achieving these goals. Next slide, please. In carrying out a SWOT analysis, it's always good to start positively by examining your strengths. Consider your strengths in terms of clinical knowledge, technical or soft skills. For example, do you excel at building a rapport with patients? What are your personal characteristics? Perhaps you're compassionate or well-organized. Consider your personal experiences as well. Perhaps you live with your grandparents and you can see the effects of aging on health, and this helps you to empathize well with your geriatric patients. Skills that are not easy for you to perform are obvious weaknesses. For example, In patient-facing roles, perhaps your questioning technique is not clear or logical. If so, how will you take the best possible medication history when you face a patient? While it can be uncomfortable acknowledging weaknesses, be as honest with yourself as you can so you can strive to change the situation. Consider if your personality or your personal life is impacting your practice as well, as sometimes that can happen too. Opportunities focus on progress, and it can be a chance to build on your strengths and rectify your weaknesses, either through self-improvement or by increasing the efficiency of your work environment. Consider how you can maximize the benefit of the different positive factors available to you at your current workplace or in relation to your life. For example, if you have support of your seniors to study a postgraduate qualification and you don't have family-based responsibilities such as parenting, maybe this is a perfect opportunity for you to upskill your qualification, so you can consider applying for a postgraduate. Understanding and dealing with threats that are obstacles to you succeeding will also help you to achieve professional fulfillment. Consider if there are ways to mitigate these threats. For example, a colleague who is frustrated with your time management is an opportunity for you to reflect on how you may increase the efficiency of your work processes. You can improve your work ethic while reducing their work stress. So be honest with yourself, leverage on your strengths and opportunities while improving your weaknesses and neutralizing your threats. Next slide, please. So here are 7 rules to utilize SWOT analysis successfully in your reflective practice. Firstly, be specific. Don't create vague definitions or goals. And Dr. Arit's going to cover this further by teaching you guys about SMART goals. Next, be objective. Ask a peer, senior, or mentor for their opinion if necessary so you can realize objectively where improvement needs to take place. This will help you to stay realistic, especially when you appraise your strengths and weaknesses. Consider the context of your reflection by considering your practice presently and what you're aspiring towards so you can create an appropriate action plan. You can also compare your performance with that of your peers to assess any gaps that need to be addressed. Keep it short and simple by avoiding needless complexity. For example, if your plan is to improve your communication skill, focus on that. If you also want to improve your empathy skill in the process, well, that's another plan to create for another day. Get started on mastering your communication skill first. Finally, based on your SWOT analysis, update your action plan and reevaluate or assess your goals to ensure you're heading in the right direction for improvement. Next slide, please. So here's a simple example of a SWOT analysis that I carried out as a junior pharmacist when I worked in hospital. So I deduced through my analysis that I was skilled in communication and fluent in South Asian languages with a passion to give back to my community. So this helped me to identify my passion to improve health literacy in the community I worked in, which was predominantly South Asian. To maximize my opportunities to do so as well, I decided to improve my clinical knowledge in order to achieve this goal. And this was specifically very easy for me in my workplace because I had a great mentor and I had access to courses, research opportunities, and training. I also decided that I had to improve my empathy skills because I was a little bit impatient when it came to working with juniors. And I decided that I had to try and put myself in their shoes, understand their confusion. And that's a skill that I use today as well as a lecturer in relation to my students when I'm teaching them. I try to put myself in their shoes and think, well, how would they try to understand this concept? Am I teaching them in a clear way? I've also learned that criticism is a chance to reflect on how I or the system that I work in can improve further. So I try my best not to get demotivated by it. Instead, I try to learn from it. I'm still trying to learn how to achieve a work-life balance, but then as they say, life is a work in progress and reflecting is a lifelong journey. Next slide. So now it's your turn. Now that you know how you should use SWOT analysis to reflect effectively, it's your turn to attempt a reflection. In summary, these are the 5 steps that can guide you. Firstly, describe a situation you're reflecting on in detail. Consider when, where it happened, who is involved, what happened, what did you or what did the others do. Next, think about your feelings and thoughts, as well as those involved before, during, and after the experience. Then, consider objectively the positives and negatives of the situation. Before concluding the impact of the experience and its implications on your practice, utilize the SWOT analysis tool here to self-appraise further on where you could improve based on this reflection. Finally, What this will do is to help you set a development plan that will help you understand what you need to do, motivate you to act, and help you to measure your progress. Next slide, please. So here are some questions to get you started on your reflective journey. Some of them may strike a note with you in terms of your relationships with your colleagues or peers, recent experiences with your patients, or challenges and situations you may have faced at work. Now, while reflecting, at all times, the key questions to address is always to assess why this particular issue is important to you, why does it matter, and what implications does it have for your work or practice if you choose to address it. I encourage you to refer to the template on the Career Development Toolkit and to work your way through the worksheets that come with it to complete your own reflection. This is excellent practice for you, and it's a great way for you to develop your career further. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you all the best for your reflective journey.
Thank you very much, Anisha. That was brilliant. I particularly like the example of the SWOT analysis you applied to your real life context. I thought that was fantastic. Thank you. Next slide, please. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Arit, to take us through the next part of the agenda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Anisha. Good to have everyone on here. So my name is Arit Udor. I'm the Senior Clinical Project Manager at the University of Birmingham. I work with the Royal College of Surgeons, their robotic group, and we do a bit of a program on robotic assisted surgery, clinical trials in this sort of areas. I'm also global lead for the FIP development goal 4. So that's advanced practice and specialization. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you on career planning. Next slide, please. So what is career planning? It's one of the important steps in your effective the CPD cycle. And it really is a stepwise process. It involves the assessment of your strengths, of your aspirations, of your values. It also involves you establishing for yourself what your career goals and objectives are and identifying what you need to achieve those goals. But most importantly, it involves you documenting all this sort of information in a format that you can periodically review and update. So what that means is you don't necessarily have to just have a career goal that is vague or just, something you just think that you want to do, but it's something that you need to, just like Anisha talked about reflective practice, you need to sit down and reflect on and document it in a manner that you can go back to when and as and when needed. And this can be either being written down or put in your digital format or whatever. But the important thing is that it's something that you can go back to periodically to see if you are still on the right track. Next slide, please. Next click. So why do we need a career plan? There are a lot of reasons anyway, but I've just put in 3 key reasons here. It provides for you, a roadmap, sort of a blueprint of where you want to go and how you want to get there. So it gives you a very clear focus, defined pathway for how you want to grow in your career and how you also want to develop. And it also keeps you motivated and focused, i.e., regardless of what every other person is doing, it helps you develop and design for yourself on an individual basis where you are per time and where you plan to be over time. So it's something that gives you clarity of vision and clarity of mission. Next slide, please. So who needs a career plan? Everyone needs a career plan. When do you need a career plan? Right now. You need a career plan today, you're going to need a career plan tomorrow. You're going to need a career plan as long as you're still practicing. So there, I've given you a few examples and a few steps in an effective career planning strategy. And the first step there is to identify for yourself what your preferred area of practice is. So for example, as a pharmacist, you get to have a lot of choices. Unlike many other careers where once you go in, say, for example, you want to be an accountant, it's, accounting, and you probably just need to think about what particular industry you want to work in. But in pharmacy practice, you're not just thinking about the industry, you're also thinking about the particular area of practice. So in that sense, you have to define for yourself, where do I want to go? In a community? Do I want to be a clinical pharmacist? Do I want to work in the industry? Do I want to be in research, and, all the other various areas of practice? And in deciding what area of practice you want to go to, and you need to think about it in terms of your strength, in terms of your interest. You also want to consider the impact of job security, working hours, for example. Some areas of practice will require you working out of hours, will require you working on the weekends. Some areas of practice are better paid than others. So you want to think about, is money a factor for me? Is it important or is it not? You will think about opportunities. Some areas of practice have a very defined career pathway, i.e., you become a pharmacist, then you become a senior pharmacist, then you become a principal pharmacist, etc., etc. For other areas of practice, you're a pharmacist and you just grow with experience. Your job title may not necessarily change, even though your experience, increases over time. For example, you own an independent community pharmacy. You're not there for the job title per se. You are the owner, and you probably just your job title. You're the pharmacist here. You're the pharmacy manager, or you're the pharmacy owner, and title is not really what you are going for. So if the title is important, you want to consider, okay, does that fit into where I want to go? Now, if you're unsure, which is where most people find themselves once they're starting out in their career, you want to ask the reverse. What area of practice is my least favorite? You want to set a list of all the opportunities that exist and begin to tick off where you think you would not like to work. And then that leaves you with a short list of where you think you might be able to work. And so that sets you on the path to defining what your preferred area of practice is. All right, next slide, please. Now, the second step is for you to list your skills and your competence level and your experience and begin to compare it with the expected standard. For example, the FIP has published the Global Competency Framework, the GBCF version 2, and therein you have a list of all the key competencies expected of early career practitioners. So you want to be able to go through that list and decide for yourself where you sit, amongst, within that framework. How much of that do you have, and how much of that do you need to seek other areas outside of your 9 to 5 to be able to develop? So for example, there are some competencies that you probably will not have the opportunity to develop within your particular area of practice. But then you might need to, for example, seek out other opportunities like volunteering for the FIP, or like doing, some of the things that others are doing within the community they serve, and that will give you an opportunity to develop those sort of competencies. And you need to also find for yourself where, ask yourself the question, where am I deficient? What are my skill sets? And if I want to go, for example, I want to become a senior pharmacist next in 2 years or in 3 years or in whatever time frame that might be for me, what do I need to get there? And then how do I compare with where I am now? And so by asking yourself those sort of questions, you can now begin to design for yourself what you need to do to plug whatever gaps or deficiencies that you might have identified. Now, your third step is to set your career goals and your key career objectives. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? When do you want to do it? Those are some key questions you need to ask. What are my career aspirations? And as you begin to ask those questions, you want to begin to break those goals down into measurable and achievable bits. So for example, in 6 months' time and in 1 year time, what do I want to achieve? In the next 2 to 5 years, what do I want to achieve? And then what's my long-term goal? And typically you tend to start at the end and then you work your way backwards. So for example, what's my long-term goal? You might think, oh, I want to be a consultant pharmacist in 10 years, for example. Now, your question now becomes, working back from that point on, you can now say, okay, if that's what I want to achieve, in the next 6 months, what do I need to be doing? In the next 1 year, what do I need to be doing? In the next three years, what do I need to be doing? So in other words, you've broken it into the chunks of time that you need to be achieving certain things to begin to take you, step by step towards that goal of being a consultant pharmacist. And one key mnemonic that we use when we're designing career goals like this is the SMART objective or SMART goal. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about what a SMART career goal is. Now, a SMART career goal is specific. In designing a specific career goal, you want to ask five key questions. What is my goal? What am I trying to achieve? Why am I trying to achieve it? Who will be responsible for achieving those goals? I.e., if it's just me, or will I need support from my mentors, from my colleagues, or from my family, etc. What's the location of that goal? I.e., is do I want to achieve that goal with where I am, or is it something that might require me changing location, or changing organization, or changing company, or whatever? And then what are the limits? What limits exist? Which limits exist? So for example, if you want to be, I don't know, a senior pharmacist in your organization, and you will need to attend attend some certifications or attend some trainings. Do you have the time? And so that immediately tells you that these are sort of some of the limits that exist. And then you now begin to define how you can, try to achieve that within the context of the resources available to you. Now, your career goal also has to be measurable. How will I measure progress? Say, for example, one of your key goals was to complete a particular training. When you have your certificate, that immediately is a measurable outcome. You can see that you have completed the training and you have your certificate to prove it. So you need to know when you have achieved your career goal and be able to say, give yourself a pat on the back and say, yeah, I've achieved it. The next goal, your goal has to be attainable. How do I attain this? So it's one thing to have a very bright and fancy and ambitious career goal, but then how do you attain it? Do you have the resources? These are the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves and be very clear in our minds if we have what it takes to achieve it. Now, is your career goal, that whatever career goal you design, is it worthwhile? In other words, he has to be relevant to your practice area, relevant to where you want to go. Remember, your ultimate goal, say, for example, is to be a consultant pharmacist. So when you're trying down here to achieve something, does it really fit into that larger goal? Because whatever mid-range or long-term or short-term goal that you are trying to achieve must in the end fit into your larger goal that you wanna get to. Now, does it fit also? Is it applicable to my current circumstances? So for example, some of the career goals you want to achieve, some of your career objectives, for example, within the context of your practice, is it relevant? Say, for example, you're in a community practice and you begin to do something that is not necessarily move you forward in increasing your, knowledge, your interest, your skill sets within that area of practice. Rather, it takes you a bit away from it. The question now becomes, is that relevant? Or do you really need to be committing the time to do that? Now, a good career goal also has to be time bound. When can I achieve this? What can I do now? I.e., what can I do in the next 24 hours? What can I do in the next 6 months? What can I do in 1 year? etc, etc. Your career goal that is a smart career goal is always time bound. Now, there are other mnemonics. There are other versions of this mnemonics. You see, there are other ones like smart career goal, i.e., so that's a career goal that has an extra R. So the extra R usually means it's realistic. Your career goal also has to be realistic. There is a second one that has to do, it's called smarter, i.e. your career goal also has to be trackable, and it has to be something that is agreed within your team. Say, for example, it's something that's not just going to affect individually, but also affect, other members of your team. It has to be agreed with your maybe manager or, your larger team. Next slide, please. So in trying to achieve your goal, you need to employ the plan, do, study, act cycle. So it's a very simple model where you create and routinely review your career plan. You also carry out your plan. It's one thing to have a plan, write it down, but then never look at it again. So you must always look at your career plan and take steps towards carrying it out. And then as you carry out your career goal in the little chunks in which you have designed it, you want to summarize the lessons you have learned, i.e. are the changes in the profession, are the changes in the industry, are the changes in the organization that might impact on your goals. So for example, the COVID-19 pandemic is, necessitated a lot of people to go in and reskill in some key areas that they never thought would be relevant. But now, say, for example, telepharmacy is now becoming quite commonly used now. So if you're not IT proficient, You want to go and learn something in that area because that's where, most practice areas are going into. So you want to summarize the lessons learned as things change, as the profession changes and develops. You want to find out what other skill sets do you need to add and how that might impact on your career goal. And then your last thing is to act. Determine what the changes need to be made, if there are any changes that need to be made to your plans, and make those changes and repeat your cycle, right? Now, my last slide would be, as a career plan, that's exactly what it is. It has to be flexible. It has to be adaptable. What that means is, even though you've had your plan, you want to look at your plan in the context of the resources you have. And also you must consider that plans do change, even the best laid ones. Circumstances will change. There are things that are outside your control. And so you must be flexible enough to adapt to when things don't necessarily go your way. For example, you might be recently, a lot of people have had to, be matched to their residence, where they want to do their residency. Some people got matched, or others just didn't. And even though that seems like a setback, it's not necessarily the end of the world. It just means that you need to go back and review what your options are and then adapt your plan and go forward rather than sitting down and giving up at that point. Yeah. And then what you must remember is that your career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. That you have somebody who got there in the 5 years, it doesn't mean that has to be, if you don't get there in 5 years, then you're a failure. No, it's a marathon. The important thing is that you get there. And so every progress is important. Your key goal is to make consistent progress, no matter how small. If you cannot run, you must work. If you cannot work, you must crawl. The important thing is that you must keep moving. So that's, for me, the key thoughts around career planning. Thank you for listening.
Ari, I thought that was brilliant and inspiring at the same time. I particularly like your use of the SMART resource and how you applied it to real life practice. Again, I think they're really helpful tips and how to use this as part of this really important process. I'm going to introduce to our third and final speaker, Prof. Toyin, to end this, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. I see some questions coming in, so please do keep the questions coming in for the panel a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, and great job, Rit and Anisha. Those were really excellent renditions of what CPD should look like and where we need to go. If we could go to the next slide, I want to welcome everybody from all around the world. We're so glad you're here. I'm going to wrap up with really a summary because you've done such a fantastic job of the action and evaluation as it pertains to early career pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists. So I'll be touching on some of the things that have been mentioned already, but really leveraging reflection and planning and the importance of documenting actions that are taken so that we can evaluate whether we're making progress towards the goals that have been set. Already Anisha and Arita talked about identifying strengths and weaknesses, so I won't have to go into details. So they've really done a great job on my behalf. On the next slide, we will have an opportunity to be able to see a cycle. There are different cycles that have been published out there. The PDSA cycle is very simple. Don't get confused. Just pick one, go with it, and move. Like Arit said, keep moving. That's the most important thing. But the CPD cycle here, we see this a lot in the Americas, particularly in the US. And it starts with reflect. And then it helps us to remember that we need to create a plan. And then after creating a plan, you should learn. And then you should evaluate that plan and see if that plan is working for you. Are you getting outcomes? And then you repeat that cycle. And in the middle of that, it tells us we have to make sure we're recording and reviewing, because sometimes you have to adjust your plan. Like Arit was saying, stay flexible. And then on the left side with this infinity cycle, you have to have some kind of a commitment to change, where you're not just writing plans every year, but that you're applying the learning that you have acquired, and that there is some change that is happening, not just within you as a learner, but that you're able to implement it either in your organization or to affect outcomes for your patients. So CPD is pretty much self-directed, ongoing, systematic, and the self-directed piece is key. So how do you identify which gaps, right, that you need to consider when you're developing your plan? And there's been a lot that has been said already, so I'm not going to go back into what Anish mentioned. I thought that was brilliant. The key thing is reflection is a part of the work. If you're not used to reflecting, then that might be a challenge, but it's something you're going to have to sit with. Reflection is a practice of periodically stepping back to ponder and express the meaning of self and to others in one's immediate environment of what has, will, or is happening. And she went through it really brilliantly, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But as far as we think about documenting, you can reflect all you want, but if you don't write it down, then the lessons learned from that reflection might be missed. I share here with you a worksheet that we use at Howard University. I shared this with our faculty. It's a career development worksheet. And as Arit and Anisha have mentioned, career development is an ongoing thing. You don't just develop one point and then you're done. No, you have to keep growing and learning, and it's something you keep reviewing. And so the first aspect of that reflect is a simple question, is to list the desired attributes of a position or role you aspire to in 5 to 10 years. And since you've been going through this presentation, if you have been thinking about what kind of position you want, please feel free to use the chat feature to type a few things about what you think you might want. The reason why documentation is critical is there's something powerful about the muscle memory. And Jack Canfield, who wrote the book on Chicken Soup for the Soul, he indicated that using a little piece of paper to write your goals can be very, very powerful. Now, the interesting thing is, as we are reflecting, right, you look in the mirror. Sometimes you like what you see, and sometimes we don't. And even this pandemic has actually made us see things that we didn't think we would see. If you're in agreement, type something in the chat to say, yes, indeed. There have been times when I didn't like what I see. The pandemic has revealed aspects of us that maybe we didn't even know existed. On the next slide, it shows additional things that you're able to actually, document, which is, what are your desired competencies? Maybe you have looked at the career toolkit that YPG put out. I want to congratulate the YPG group. They did a fantastic job with that toolkit, very detailed, very thorough. So you have to list your desired competencies. How are you going to know what those are if you haven't even looked at the global competency framework or some of the suggestions from your expert areas of practice, and what your peers may have suggested to you, or your mentors, coaches, and supervisors? I want to emphasize the importance of feedback. If you are not the kind of person who likes to receive feedback, you'll have a problem developing, period. So get used to and comfortable with receiving feedback, because it helps you think about the things that you know and the things you don't know. So I like to share this because it helps us in determining the things that other people know and what you know are open to you in that quadrant 1. Now, there are certain things that are known to you, but they are known to others. Those are your secrets, You might have a social security number, or there might be some traumatic thing that happened to you that you haven't shared it. That's hidden, that's quadrant 3. Now, there are certain things that are known to others, but they're not known to you. That's where you are blind, and that's where feedback can help open you up to what everybody else knows about you, but you don't know. For example, you might have a tick when you are presenting, and maybe you always do something like this, and you don't realize it until you're recorded and somebody tells you, oh, look, you're always doing this, or you're always saying during your presentations. If you're not open to feedback, you will have no idea about your blind spots, and blind spots can be unfolded through feedback. And then there's the last quadrant, which really talks about what's unknown to you, what's unknown to others. Usually extremes of joy or extremes of pain can reveal what is unknown. That's when you hear about this very nice gentleman or female who suddenly gets a gun and decides to shoot everything up because something happened traumatically in their life. So sometimes you may not know what you're capable of doing. The same thing, maybe you were immersed into some joy and you found yourself doing something really positive that you didn't even know you were capable of. So feedback obviously is helpful to reduce what's unknown so that we can go on. My colleagues have already shared the different sources for which you become more aware during training. Serving as a mentor can also help you as you be more aware of yourself and how you are in front of others. We already talked about feedback trainings, talking to industry professionals, and so on, are very useful. On the next slide, I want us to consider, as we're simplifying the whole idea of reflection and evaluation that leads to self-awareness, is you have to identify your own needs. So this might be good for the profession, but what is important for you? And I know that Arit already went into details about the goal setting, so we won't go into that in much detail. For the next slide, what you find here basically is that CPD must start from the position that you are. So your starting point will be different from Shivani's starting point, for example, and Adina's starting point will be different from Minang's starting point, for example. But that's okay, you see, because we have a journey that we have to complete, and you start from where you are to where you need to be. Thank you. If we could move on to the next slide. So looking at this, I want you to use the chat feature, please. This is my own active learning for you. What are your top 5 desired competencies? Just use the chat, think about it. If you can only remember 1 or 2, that's okay. For you as an individual, what are your top 5 desired competencies? I want to see activity in the chat. And as you do that, you will notice that it's important for you to start thinking about, how am I going to accomplish that? And then the next step becomes, I must write out 1 to 2 broad goals that are associated with those specific desired competences. All right, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but maybe your chat, oh, there we go. Negotiation, conflict, and resolution. Thank you, Sissy, for starting us out. So you can therefore create 1 or more SMART learning objectives based on that specific goal. So Sissy says conflict resolution, for example, and she might say, I want to be able to resolve conflict confidently within a 24 to 48 hour period, for example. And she can ask herself, how would I therefore begin to get to that goal? Must I attend conferences, workshops? Do I have a mentor who can guide me through the ideas that I have? And how will I begin to map that out in detail? But if you don't write those down and share it with a mentor, for example, then you will know if you're making progress on that specific goal of conflict resolution. So I encourage you, as you are identifying this, make sure to meet with a mentor. I've mentioned mentors so many times, and I can tell you that mentors have assisted me in growing in so many ways. So on the next slide, it does tell us that you should discuss with a mentor and identify how you would accomplish 1 or more of your top 5 desired competencies. So those things you have written down, you have to share it with somebody else who can tell you, is this realistic? Is this relevant? Is this practical? Ari told us about the SMART and SMARTer. It's important for you to understand whether your goal is realistic, because those who have gone through before will be able to truly describe and say, you know, you said you want to accomplish that in 6 months, but let me tell you, it's going to take you 2 years to do that. You have to be able to listen to those who have gone before, so that way you will truly accomplish what you want in a realistic time frame and not inflict upon yourself, you know, pain or stress or anxiety that is not needed. And then here it says list specific learning activities. Those learning activities are varied, and depending on the area of speciality you're interested in, the activities that will be encountered by Seema will be very different from the activities that Flavia might be able to go through in order to accomplish his goals. So you see why it is self-directed and it's very individual. Your goals are very individualistic. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so here is some examples of experiential tasks, for example, in academia. Say you're leading a meeting, it grows you, it helps you grow, it helps you learn more, it helps you in networking, giving presentations as we're doing today, solving problems, advising student organizations, working on projects, and the list goes on. I encourage you to go to the Career Development Toolkit. There's a whole lot of resources in there for you to learn from. If we go to the next slide, please. So then the next step becomes, you've done your reflection, you have plans, and you're developing activities you've shared with your mentor, excuse me. Now you have to actually do, right? And in the doing, you have to evaluate. And in evaluating, you have to ask some real serious questions, you know, is when I did all my learning activities, did I grow? Did I stay the same? Did I improve? Or was the improvement sort of minimal? Or was it really a lot? Or did I set my goal right? You know, that's evaluating your process, but also evaluating your learning. So there are a couple of things that you're evaluating there. And so it's important to not only think about the process with which you came about the goals, you can evaluate that, and then you can also evaluate whether you learned or didn't learn, because that in itself is information and feedback for you. What barriers did you encounter, for example, for implementation? And what kinds of things might you do differently? And carry a peer along, or even your mentor, in order to make sure that you are actually on the right track for your goals. Next slide, please. And so as I wind down on the next slide, there are 7 tips, obviously, for success in evaluating and recording. Reflect is essential. You can't skip that. It gets easier over time. Make sure you record and write down what you're reflecting on and what you're learning in the process of reflection. And after a while, it gets quicker. The move through the cycle gets quicker because you're used to it. Involve a peer. It's always nice to talk to somebody. I call them your CPD buddy. You know, involve coaches for success, your mentors, learn in communities, get involved in journal clubs, writing groups, you know, those kinds of things are very helpful. Go through the process yourself at least once to help you support others. And it's always a continuous learning process. On the next slide, it's important for us to remember that there are tools and resources for you to use. I've emphasized the career development toolkits. I know that the Royal Pharmaceutical Society has lots of great resources. The American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy also have great resources. So also is the Pharmaceutical Sciences Group, the American Association of Pharmaceutical Sciences. So look at the field you're interested in, and it'll provide you with resources necessary. And I strongly recommend get involved in projects, committees, in your associations and organizations. Get active. And that's how you begin to grow in specific areas, or even begin to discover who you are, what you want to be, what works for you, what doesn't work, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And of course, our colleagues, mentors, and supervisors can help us with the feedback that we receive. I thank you for your attention today and for your participation. And I'm going to just, you know, the 4 mistakes that are common is overlooking your context. Again, your specialty is important. The decoupling of reflection from real work, learned by doing. Remember to not underestimate your mindset. Address culture. Culture trumps strategy for breakfast. So you have to remember to address that, and measure results as best as you can. Measure results as best as you can. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Ravi at this point. I thank you so much for your attention today.
Thank you, Toyin. That was brilliant. I think just the whole list of speakers on reflection were absolutely fantastic and gave some wonderful advice and some real helpful thought on how we can take this forward and actually make it live and make it real for us in day-to-day practice. I'm going to go to the questions. I think we've had some fantastic questions actually come in. Some been directed to particular speakers, but I will offer it to the panel, and I'm sure you all will have opinions and views around certain things. We had one question in the chat function a bit earlier, which was about how often, periodically, would the panel suggest review around continual professional development, or reflection around continual professional development? I don't know if go to Anisha maybe first, as that was that part of it.
Sorry, I did a Zoom rookie mistake and I started talking on mute. So I think very much that it really depends on how your career is growing as well, and on what are the challenges or what are the changes that you wish to make to your career. I believe at the start of your career, that is a very dynamic part of your career. That's where you're learning so many new things, you're learning so many new skills. And in that part, you should actually look into perhaps reviewing even quarterly, as you try and identify goals that you are reaching towards and learnings that you have to make. That's also a part where, as you do a lot more practical experience, you start to really discover the direction that you want to go in. That's when you start to discover your passions, what actually motivates you with work. I would say that, to be honest, when I started working, it took me about 3 to 4 years to try firstly community, and then I tried clinical, before finally settling on academia as a chance. And 2 years into academia, that's when I really fell in love with it and really realized that this is where I really want to go forward. So continue embracing and reviewing. Just enjoy the process as it goes along. You will know when you've reached the right place and where you want to go further, but it's really a very individual journey.
That's really helpful. Anything from Toyin or Arit on that to add? Okay.
No, I think she said it great. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, great. Fantastic. There was a very similar question, which I think is quite linked, which is about how often would you review your career path? I know Arit has already responded on that, but any views from people? I know from myself personally, I review it quite regularly, but any from your vast array of experiences, any suggestions or how often you personally review your career objectives and goals? I don't know if Toyin might be useful.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I update my CV, right, every so often, because that helps me see what I've done this month. Have I accomplished my goals? And then I have a page of the things that I wanted to accomplish in that year. And then I start, so it's like from one to accomplished, from goal to accomplished. I strongly recommend that, as Anisha said, she said quarterly. For me, because a lot of things are happening in my world, I have to almost review it every month. Otherwise, I'll forget that, oh, yeah, I did that. Or, oh, yeah, I didn't do that. But if there's not that much activity, I think quarterly is totally fine. I do believe also that it's good to set meetings with your mentor so that they can ask you those hard questions you don't want to ask yourself. And it might actually reveal other things you have totally missed. Remember the blind spots we were discussing? And so if you have set meetings with a mentor, maybe it's twice a year or so, and you have your own personal quarterly meetings like Anisha was suggesting, that could really help you think, I promised I was going to read that book, but that was 2 years ago. I haven't even read it yet. Those types of things. And it sort of gives you that whole urgency of, am I neglecting myself? So you're important and your goals are important and you need to grow. And that would be my simple.
That's really great. Arit, did you want to add anything to that as well?
No, I had already answered. So for me, I review my career plans every year. And usually I make that coincide with my annual performance review. And but that's just me. It just gives me something to, to aim for. But again, it's down to the individual, how often you want to do it. There's no hard and fast rule. Quarterly is totally fine, especially for your early career, because then again, like Anisha and Professor Topher there said, a lot of things are happening at that level of your career. So it's good to do it as often as you would want to.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Another question that's been asked is about how do countries establish a national continual professional development program, and how do we motivate pharmacists to getting involved in doing this cycle, a very important cycle? I just wanted to raise that to a couple of questions in there. I didn't know if anyone wanted to go try and tackle that important question first, or try to. Any?
Well, I think it's just to start, really. What has happened is what the literature does show is it does take a lot to get traction. So for example, in UK, even when they started, it took about 5 years for a lot of people to actually get into really doing that. So, even you just need to start somewhere and not necessarily think that just because you've started, everybody is suddenly going to become very excited about it. Pharmacists historically, for some reason, don't really do that CPD too often. The engagement is quite minimal. But it's just something that you just need to look at what other countries have done, see if what they've done can be adaptable to your national context, work with your regulators and your accreditation agencies and every national leadership bodies, and then just begin to develop a framework and just push it out there. It's not going to be perfect the first time around, but then with time, as you review and update it, then eventually everyone gets engaged. That would be my own suggestion.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. I think also it's something about career objectives. I think it back leads to your career plan. I think if you're reviewing it regularly, you're understanding your areas of where you might need to improve on, and then hopefully you would progress up a career ladder in that way by reflecting and being able to develop your skill set, I think, as well, which will, I think, motivate pharmacists generally once they're seeing that progression within their career as well. I didn't know if any other members of the panel wanted to add to what Arit just mentioned there.
I think she said it brilliantly. You have to create buy-in, though. It's critical that you create buy-in. It's not going to happen immediately. You start with a small group of folks in your country that are very passionate about a CPD framework of some sort, and as you do your research from all the other countries that have already executed that, in fact, FIP put out a task force, and they put out a report on CPD in different countries. You can glean from the different ranges of what other countries have done. And then you can sit down with the stakeholders in your country, regulators, educators, practitioners, and see what it is that you're going to adopt for your own country. And after you have identified what seems to be amenable to all the different stakeholders, because if they can agree, trust me, the rest of the country won't agree. And when you start from there, you start with your innovators. Remember the Rogers adoption curve? You start with your innovators, the first 2.5% to 5% of the population, and then gradually you start pushing it further into the different organizations to see how they might strengthen it further, give you feedback. You might, tweak it a little bit or refine the statements. And then when it is adopted by something national, you can push it out to the rest of the world. And like Arit said, you will learn, you will update it, and that's okay.
No, that's great. That's really good. I have a question just a little bit more about the reflection and planning bit, which is around, does it always have to be on your own? Do you have to do that bit on your own? I think Toya might have mentioned this, that actually it doesn't have to be done in isolation or just from your own personal perspective. Can you outsource the reflection and planning, or can it be done with a group of people, or does it have to be done on your own? Or, what's the confidence around that? I just wanted to get a sense of your own personal experiences about how you have planned reflection and those parts around your continual professional development cycles.
I think that doing it in a group is helpful, because many times we are concerned about whether we're doing it right, and so that's why I put one of those questions in the section. Is usually when I do workshops with individuals, I put them in groups and I ask them to reflect together, to ask those questions. And there is something about bouncing something off or checking with a peer that helps you feel like, oh, I'm not so bad after all. And it builds a little bit of confidence in the process. Now, remember, your own CPD might be different from the other person's CPD, but just both of you or three of you or four of you going through the process together might help you be a little bit more confident that, okay, I know what I should be doing. And then when you share it with a mentor, then a mentor can guide you on whether, some of the goals that you have set out are realistic, achievable, and they might even point you to additional resources so that the process of getting from point A to point B is a little shorter, as opposed to you trying to, figure it out yourself, and it's a little more difficult for you to get to what you want to get to. But Anisha might have additional things.
I actually do want to really add on Prof. Toyan's statement about mentors being very helpful, and this is based on my own career journey. I found mentors to be incredibly helpful, because I feel that especially when you're in the early stage of your career, I think as quite a few of our attendees are, you don't really see what where you need to improve. Sometimes you do lack a little bit in self-insight, and it takes someone of a certain level of experience to actually sometimes even realize your strengths, to realize where you can improve further, and to actually in some ways propel you into another stage where you can push your career plan further to achieve goals that you never would have otherwise thought of. So I'm a huge proponent for having a mentor, a career mentor. It could be a senior colleague. In my case, for example, I'm in the School of Pharmacy, but my mentor, one is in pharmacoeconomics, which has nothing to do with pharmacy practice per se, and one is in the School of Medicine. And I've learned so much from them. And basically because they have looked at me and they've been able to say, look, Anisha, you could actually do much better here. In this different field, or some of them can even sit me down and say, Anisha, you need to mellow down when you're at work. And these are things that I wouldn't otherwise realize. So I really highly recommend finding a mentor, finding someone you can learn from.
That's really brilliant advice. I think I've probably got one last question in relation to participating in activities that might not be associated with your professional day-to-day clinical practice, for instance. So there's lots of activities and life learning that we do throughout our careers. Do people feel that as a useful part of the continual professional development cycle? What's people's views on that? So, there would be other situations which you'll bring into life which require your critical thinking skills, leadership, management skills, and can you apply that as part of this cycle to help with your career development? I just wanted to get a sense from the panel of your views and opinions. Anyone want to have a go and start that off first? Toyin, thank you.
Yes, I can tell you that non-pharmacy related activities have helped me in my administrative role. And so I strongly recommend that if there is something you are able to do and you do it well, even if it's not pharmacy, keep on doing it and serving in that way. Someday it'll be relevant. As a dean now, a lot of the skills that I'm using right now are not the skills that I was taught in pharmacy school. A lot of those I picked up on the way in my service to my community. I'm a person of faith, and so in my church, I'm very active. And some of the skills that I had to use in leadership there, I have had to use in leading volunteers in my association, in my college, because I learned those over the past couple of decades. So learning is something that you take with you, and there's some transferable skills that will assist you in doing your job even better.
That's wonderful feedback. Any other comments from Anisha or Arit at all on that? I think that summarized it beautifully.
I think she's wrapped it up beautifully.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, there is one question which I think it's just come back, and I'd just like maybe to answer before we close things, which is about soliciting feedback which may be a bit negative around people's weaknesses and how that's done in a safe and effective fashion. Any recommendations or tips from people who may have been giving feedback before around weaknesses? I tend to use it as areas of improvement rather than a negative word of weakness, but didn't know if anyone had a view about any tips of how to do that, manage that properly.
So what we use in Monash, and that's something that I think my students are used to receiving almost on a regular basis, is we use this model called the Keep, Start, Stop model, where we give them advice on what they should keep doing, what they should start doing, and what they could stop doing. So what it really does is it emphasizes on what you should continue doing, which you're doing really well, what you should start improving on, and what you need to stop doing in essence. So it's a really nice sort of systematic way of getting holistic feedback. And it's sort of a good way to kind of encourage these conversations, especially when you're reflecting in a peer setting. So that's my advice for Sitsi. Maybe she can consider using that model in conversations at her workplace.
That's really great. I've done some terribly bad chairing and now we're slightly over time. So I would just once again like to say a massive thank you to our wonderful panel of speakers. I have been inspired by listening to you all and all the advice you've been given. And I will take a lot from it myself. And I hope other colleagues that have joined us for this webinar today can equally take away lots of pearls of wisdom, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to now hand it over to Ikwe to finish off there and wrap up this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I want to sincerely thank our moderator, Mr. Ravi Sharma, as well as our speakers, Professor Toyin, Dr. Arit, and Ms. Anisha, for a very wonderful webinar presentation. Really got to learn a lot today. Also, I want us to know that the recording for this episode will be made available on the www.fip.org. And please remember to give your feedback as an attendee to us so that we can better improve on our webinars. You can give us a bit of information there on webinars@fip.org. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. This is where the webinar recordings would be made available at. And if you're not a member of our now, and also download the career development toolkit for early career pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists. And then FIP has a series of digital events for this year. So there is one on the 7th of April, 2021, which will be on FIP setting goals for the decade ahead. So 2, FIP DG18, access to medicines, devices, and services. So thank you for your attention, and we hope to see you at the next FIP Congress. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.